YouTubers, welcome to my voiceover video. I purchased this 2016 Fuji Reveal 1.1 from Bike Shop Warehouse online. It came shipped to me and it was assembled by me. Here's a look at the colors and how the branding is done. This of the Reveals, this is the higher spec one. It has a 2x10 drivetrain. All the Reveals have a 27.5 inch rim. Ignore the pedals. That's just what I happen to have sitting around. It has Shimano components, and they seem to be a little bit of a mismatch. Most predominantly is the rear derailleur, which is XT, which is what I was aiming for. Again, on that 2x10 drivetrain. The brakes and the shifters and such are a slightly different Shimano components. So if you were to buy, and the front derailleur is not labeled here, but if you were to buy a Trek and it had XT, everything would be XT. But it got the XT in the rear, which is what I cared about. This oval would be the seat and the seat post and the handlebars and such. That is a Fuji owned brand, I believe. I was pretty happy with this bike. I guess I'm comparing it to my last bike. Oh, that is a fork lockout, and that works really well. You can see below that red knob twists as you push and release that button. As I was saying before, on my previous bike, this is a 2011 Trek 4300, which has a 3x8 drivetrain. On that bike, it was a solid bike in its day, but the fork is quite outdated. You know, the 3x8 drivetrain is outdated. The wheels are 26s, which is outdated. The stem is longer, changes the attack angle, and the bars are narrow. The brakes were good, but those are all the things I was trying to get by switching up the bikes. If I were to upgrade this Fuji, I would go to a dropper seat post probably. So the difference between that 11 and this bike, there's an inch and a half additional distance of, I guess, pedal to ground clearance, which would be a huge help. To work on this bike, it was pretty easy. I had some trouble with the headset, and I think that was a tolerance issue by Fuji, and I contacted Bike Shop Warehouse, and I think I'm going to use a different arrangement of spacers. That's where the bottle holder goes, and that was one of my biggest hesitations for buying the bike. But I was aware of it before I bought it, and I used it last night, and it didn't seem to be too much of an issue. I was pretty happy to get the full suspension. This decal here refers to ASTM standard of jumps no greater than 61 centimeters, which is about 2 foot. And I think that's just kind of a disclaimer. I don't know how critical that is. I know that bottle holder is ugly, but that's what I had in the shop. This ship missing those fasteners. Again, Bike Shop Warehouse helped me out. The grips are a lock-on, and that is definitely a good style grip. I like how they perform. The rear shock is a Radium Expert. The front is a Minute Comp. And on that front shock, there's a thing called a Hexlock. And I'll post a link of another YouTube video that shows how that works. There are directions on it, and it's important to read that. In addition to this bike, I also looked at my buddy's bike is a Trek, and I forget the sequence, but it was quite the bike, but it was a hardtail, and he spent $1,300, and his was a 2x10 drivetrain, and that was kind of my benchmark. It's a 29er. I test drove it, and it had a great set of forks. That's one of the things I looked at other bikes, and there's a lot of bikes with didn't have that drivetrain and didn't have that quality of forks. One of the first full suspension ones I looked at was a Diamondback. I can't remember if it was on Performance or Nashbar or both, but it was also on Amazon, and I read some reviews on that. And the frames, there's a lot of good reviews, but then there was 2 different reviews where the frame had cracked. Now that might have been covered under warranty, but that's not something that I was interested in. I looked at used bikes. There's plenty of places to buy bikes on Facebook. Another difference between this and the 2011 is how it steers. I would refer to it as the rake, which is maybe a motorcycle term, but the slant of the steering tube is a lot more far forward than my 2011. And I gather that that's real good at speed, and it's maybe not as good, or it's hard to get used to at slow speeds. So just something to be aware of. It doesn't seem to be a huge burden yet, and I'll probably like this more as I start using it as at speed. The fork looks like it's backwards, but that's not. It's just a different design than others. If you purchase something like this, and the brakes feel soft, rather than putting a lot of time in, my recommendation is to just get the lines so they're vertical, which in the front brake you can do as it sits, and just clamp your brake lever tight and leave it for well over 12 hours, something like 24 hours. There would be a few bubbles, and they work their way up to the top, and the line stiffens up. It's hard to believe, but it's true. The same with the rear, but I had to put it on a stand, so the lever was quite a bit higher than the caliper. And I tilted the front wheel up high, and both the brakes tightened up. The suspension has 140 millimeters of travel, both front and rear. And the way it came to me, there's 62 pounds of air in the front and 145 in the rear. That probably seems about right for maybe about 3-foot drops or jumps. But if you think about the typical riding, even if you do live where there's a lot of elevation and rocks, you do spend more of your time going uphill than downhill, so it's probably a little firm at that amount of pressure. The rear shock has a O-ring on it that kind of gauges how far it compresses and you can reset it and slide it up. The front fork does not, but I was able to see some debris and such to see how much travel I got there. So far I haven't bottomed it out. I plan to soften it up a little bit. Other bikes like the Outland had maybe 120 millimeters of travel, which I think is roughly an inch less. I think this is somewhere in the range of 4.5. And the Outland would be maybe an inch less, or maybe vice versa. Maybe the Outland is 4.5 and this is an inch more. That's just a rough figure. I picked this knowing that there's all kinds of 29ers out there. In fact, I think Specialized and Trek do exclusively 29ers. There is a YouTuber who talked about the Giant website, and the geometry between the 29 and 27.5 really doesn't make a lot of difference. And there's plenty of data that shows that one isn't necessarily specifically faster than the other. So I wanted all the other componentry at a specific price, and when I was done with the bike, even if I thought most of the market would be looking for 29, I didn't care about that. That's how I picked this bike. Hardtail versus full suspension. Full suspension is certainly heavier, maybe in the range of 2 pounds. I didn't think that was too significant. I compared that to weight of one full, like 20-ounce bottle. Although I don't have those numbers in front of me. This bike has does not have a chainstay that interferes with the chain. So it's kind of neat to not have that slapping around. The headset sizes, the screw sizes in the headset seem to be a little small to me. I think they're a 4 millimeter Allen head, and there's several out there that are 5. That's just such a critical connection on the bike that I think heavier would be better there. The seat post is super long. I'm 6 foot, 190 pounds. There's markings on the seat post, and where this seat post is adjusted here is at the very top of those markings, and then there is roughly 5 inches of travel past that top marking. The controls are maybe a little busy where that remote lockout is for the fork. There's not a lot of room for your thumb to pick whether you're trying to shift up or whether you're hitting the lockout for the fork. I really like the lockout, and I don't plan to make any changes quickly, but I have already considered moving the fork lockout to my left hand. There's several bikes out there. It seems like they're changing over to 1x11 drives, and I can see the benefits of that, but I think I'm pretty happy I picked this one. I hope this is helpful for you, and have a nice day.